Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Joe, and today's guest is James McCall. He was the founder and managing director of MetroNet UK in the early 2000s, which was a B2B internet service provider. It grew both organically and later through acquisition to become a £50 million plus business with more than 300 staff. After 3 management buyouts, it was finally sold in 2020 for around £180 million. James spent 20 years or so in the telecoms industry, mainly in sales roles, including roles at Lucent, Telia, Tele2, Lanet, and Madge Networks, which is where I knew him from. He left school at 16 with 1 GCSE. James currently enjoys spending quality time with his family. He also focuses on his passion for racing driving, along with managing his investments in property and other businesses. James McCall, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there, Joe.
So I always find that it's useful to identify with entrepreneurs what drove them towards entrepreneurship. And sometimes that can be from their early childhood or sometimes not. What was your early life like? And did you find a tendency towards business from that stage? Or what were your ambitions at that stage?
It's probably fair to say that I had no ambitions. I left school at 16 and fought my way through a huge amount of jobs, many of which were boring. And I can remember escaping out the toilet window of quite a few of them before the first day was over. I guess my career really started when I got into telecoms and started working just before the dot-com bubble for a telecoms company in a sales role. But whilst I kind of enjoyed it, it was very much a cog in a machine type scenario. And one of the main frustrations that I had all the way through my sales career was spending so much time cultivating a customer to the point of ordering, only for that customer to be treated poorly from an after sales perspective. And that was my biggest frustration with any industry, really, not just that industry. But none of that led me to have any aspirations other than to earn a living and have fun, really. I never had any aspirations to start my own business. It just kind of happened.
So at that time, you were basically working. You were quite okay with the concept of wage slavery in that sense, as others normies would say it. You know, you were working paycheck to paycheck. It was paying the bills. You were in your 20s, and at that point, no real desire to upset the apple cart.
Absolutely. However much money I earned that month was how much money I spent that month, and that's kind of how it
But
works.
at least you didn't spend more, so that's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, I did spend significantly more, as it happened, but I never at any point spent less.
No, that's true. I was exactly the same. As long as the cash machine would keep giving me money, then I never bothered looking at the balance. And that's what I was kind of like in my early 20s. But in terms of the kind of trajectory that your career took after that, obviously you were primarily involved in sales, and you highlighted there that you were a little disappointed with what happened after the selling had taken place. Does that mean that you had more of an interest maybe in fulfillment than sales per se, or were you naturally driven towards sales?
I think I was naturally driven towards sales. I kind of enjoyed the interaction part of it with other people, but a frustration I've always had since quite a young age is poor customer service in any industry, in any just basic stuff like people not calling you back, people not responding to email, people not doing what they've promised they're going to do. And that could be from buying a cup of coffee at a coffee shop all the way up to, anyone who's unlucky enough to have dealt with a conveyancing practice will know how totally inadequate they are in terms of dealing with basic customer needs, like returning calls, like giving updates. And, I would often find when I went to other countries, there was, for example, in the US, there was at least an increased layer of customer service. You knew they didn't really care, but at least they pretended like they care. Yeah. Whereas in the UK, they just genuinely didn't care. And so I knew that with the bar set so low, I always knew, but never really considered it, that there was a huge opportunity to swim the other way.
Yeah. And what that is what led to you beginning things, or you had different jobs before you got to that stage?
That had no bearing at all on me. That's just something that when I look back now, with the benefit of hindsight, that I always knew was an area that it was going to be very easy to shine in. But that had absolutely no bearing on why I ended up starting my own business.
All right. So why don't we head in that direction from your early sales roles, of which, of course, we worked together for a while at Madge, which itself turned out to be one of the most tumultuous organizational history I've seen. And it was, an odd time around the .com bubble bursting and all the exuberance before that. What was your career trajectory like in the early 2000s and leading up to your first business?
Well, so in the early 2000s, I was working for a company called Tele2, who were a Scandinavian business, one of a large group of businesses. I think there was something like 168 businesses within the group, which we were one of. We were also, sadly, the only one that was not profitable. So when the .com bubble burst, we were significantly under the microscope. We were kind of bleeding edge. There was a company called Ionica who bought some licenses for using wireless broadcast systems in the UK to try and provide. In fact, they were using it as an alternative to BT phone lines, but just to provide voice services to customers. This company had acquired those licenses and had launched a wireless internet service. So providing an alternative at the time to dial-up and the kind of embryonic ADSL, which was still very much, there was probably 2 or 3% rollout. The rest was all dial-up. So it was a slow technology, but it was quicker than dial-up. It was fraught with problems. We were the first company to ever consider rolling out internet services with wireless. We had some businesses and some end users, but it kind of went in the right direction. But when the .com bubble burst, it was a classic knock on the door moment. Sorry, guys, we're shutting the business. So we turned the lights off, and I got a call from someone I'd met during the course of that business, who had bought the assets of another defunct telco called Atlantic Telecom. And some of the assets involved some wireless equipment, like the equipment we were using at Tele2. And they asked me to come and have a look at what they had, see if I thought there was a possibility to roll out similar services using the assets that they had. I did some consultancy for them. We looked at it. We made a few attempts. It was difficult equipment to work with. It didn't really work very well. So it was a very rocky path. I probably spent 6 months to a year. We set up a small business to try and roll out these services, but it never really got anywhere. There was lots of technical challenges. And halfway through, I actually left and got another job. But I was still kind of in touch. and nothing. I could see that there was some scope for things to work, but it never really went that far. And I then got a phone call, and they said, "James, we're selling, we're ditching this asset." So that's when I saw an opportunity. There was a lot of equipment. It was in the UK. The equipment was old. It was difficult to use. It was really obsolete. So just out of interest, I put it on eBay, and I got lots of interest in it. But in particular, I made contacts ultimately with a guy in India who had won a government project in India to roll out wireless services. And essentially what happened is, after the most intense negotiation I have ever had, and I will say I've been married for 20 years as well, we cut a deal where I sold him half of the equipment we had in the warehouse for £300,000, knowing that I could acquire the business for £150,000. So that's how it all kind of started. So I went to someone I knew who got some business angel investors together and said, "Look, I put forward a business case to say, look, I can buy this company and all the assets for 150. I can already generate 150 of working capital by selling just half of the equipment that we don't need to this guy in India." And that's how the business, we got some backing from the business angels, and that's kind of how the business started. It was as simple as that, really. So more luck and circumstance than judgment, for sure.
Well, it's incredible, really, that there was such an arbitrage opportunity. The valuation at 300,000, and you could purchase it for 150,000. It almost makes it, self-financing.
Yes, absolutely. But let's not forget that I didn't have £150,000 to purchase it in the first place.
No, that's right.
That was a major issue. So although I knew I could sell part of it, some of the assets for 300, I first needed to find 150 grand to buy the business, which I didn't have.
So what did the business case look like with this first set of business angels? How did you kind of prep out that?
So I explained what we've been doing, and it wasn't a difficult concept to understand. It was, instead of having to lay copper and fiber cables, we provide wireless services. We do it wirelessly. Part of the assets that we acquired were a dozen rooftops, very high rooftop sites, typically council power blocks with equipment cabins on the roof, with radio equipment already deployed, and a fiber optic network connecting all these sites together, as well as a huge warehouse with enough steelwork to build the Eiffel Tower, and a whole bunch of additional cabins to roll out more wireless sites. So it wasn't difficult for them to see what the scope of the opportunity could be. They had no idea whether there was a market for these kind of services, but we were able to demonstrate that we had historically gained some customers, and I was able to say, well, in the business that I was running before, we had 3,000 customers. So there is scope for this. So for them, it was a kind of no risk investment because we were self-funding from day one. I guess the risk to them was that the Indian deal didn't complete, but we did it through escrow and stuff like that, so it wasn't a problem. So it was a kind of a pretty low risk investment for those guys.
Right. And was it a consortium, or was it like just a few?
No, it was a consortium. There's kind of small venture capitalists that are made up of a bunch of high net worth individuals, and each investment is like a fund. So I think there was a dozen investors in total.
Right. Amazing. And so they having agreed to this proposal, I mean, what was the competitive landscape looking like? Because clearly providing wireless services, I'd imagine that would immediately put you into engagement with the big players like Vodafone and O2 and so
on. Well, obviously not at that time. We're talking in the early 2000s still. So, well, we're talking probably 2004, 2005 by the time we're coming to market. And there was only one game in town, which was BT, and anyone providing services that are overlaid over that BT network. So in terms of targeting customers, it was pretty simple, really. You targeted customers where the BT connectivity was poor, and if BT couldn't provide it, then no one else could provide it. This was a transitional phase for us, and I won't go into all the technology because it was overly complex, much more complex than it needed to be. We were using the wrong equipment. Although there was a market for our services and the business grew, we actually went. We found a different application to launch the business, which was CCTV. It wasn't to provide the same services, so we ended up becoming a very successful mobile CCTV provider. We were working with the police, all the local councils, all sorts of organisations that I didn't know existed within the government, and we were providing CCTV connections back to a central control room. The wood didn't have to be fibered in. They could be when a camera was no longer useful or it displaced the crime, it could be picked up and moved. So it made us. It gave us some huge capital reserves because most of our business was with local and central government, and they don't like any recurring revenue. They like to pay as much upfront as possible. So normally, where you would on a 3-year contract, someone would normally would pay for that services monthly or annual, whereas local government would prefer to pay the whole lot 3 years all in advance, which for a startup business is exactly what you want.
Yeah.
So that worked very well for us, and it became so successful that we spent a lot of time having to upgrade the network to at some points we were carrying tens of thousands of video streams simultaneously. And the compression technology was not as good as it is now for the likes of us on Zoom and stuff like that. It was 4 or 6 or 8 megabits per camera. So what we ended up building, paid for by these CCTV cameras, was an extremely powerful and robust network that we were then able to start providing meaningful services to private business over.
Was it designed as a business to business play from the outset? And you mentioned that CCTV was the primary application, but did you have a vision for a broader spectrum of services right at the outset?
I didn't have a vision for a broader spectrum of services, but I knew from my experience at Tele2 that we didn't want to work with consumers.
Yeah. Okay.
Because and again, that was really because however much every consumer that you sold to used more resource than a business would, was more difficult to support and was more demanding for perhaps a tenth of the revenue.
Yeah.
So you could be as nice to a consumer and get all the loyalty that a consumer could give, but it's still never going to deliver much in terms of revenue. It's not like they say, "Oh, I've got another 10 houses I'd like to connect." So we never ever dealt with consumers.
Right. Now, one of the things that I find completely intriguing about this is your professional background prior to even beginning any of this was basically sales. Okay.
Yeah.
But that early consulting engagement suggests a serious technical involvement as well. So where did you get that kind of knowledge from to offer it professionally?
Well, I think when you're selling a product that is bleeding edge, you get to understand what the downfalls and the pitfalls are. And it's difficult to sell something if you've not got the confidence in being able to deliver it. And you're also selling a service that many customers are very skeptical about. If you're selling something delivered over wireless, which at the time was kind of a new way to deliver stuff, they'd say, what if it rains? What if it's foggy? What if something gets in the way? What if it blows off the roof? And that necessitates understanding more and more about the product that you're selling. And when you start, and so you start having to get under the hood of the whole thing and understanding what's what. And then when you know what the commercial offering looks like and you know how it works, all of a sudden you can plug the two together and it's like a light gets turned on. You understand what the hell's going on. Yeah.
And I think that's it's very good to have that kind of 360-degree view of a business's operations. It's kind of, from the sales side, but also the inside of the operation and also the supply chain aspects as well, so that you've got a vision of the entire thing, especially if you're going to lead the organization as you ended up doing. So were you a confident leader right from the beginning, given this task of basically growing this organization when you had not had such a role before? What were the challenges that you faced there?
I was definitely confident. We haven't got long enough to talk about all the challenges, but because there were so many. We were in a market that was evolving so quickly, and we needed to be even more nimble than that. We needed to evolve and do U-turns and change direction on a regular basis. We were delivering technology that was untried, untested. We were running huge networks. So I needed people that understood how those worked and were able to build them from scratch. Whilst my technical knowledge got very good during this process, I can't look at the matrix like a lot of these guys can. I knew what I wanted to achieve, but I didn't know the words or commands that needed to be used to be able to do that. I could never configure a Cisco router, for example. So finding those people early on was crucial.
So did you insource all of that? Did you build your own team for that, or was any of that outsourced?
No, nothing was ever outsourced at any point.
Right. So you took care of all the technicals in-house, as well as the customer service as well. Everything was provided by your organization.
100%.
And the early part of it, once you had established how you could use the equipment, and then the early days of offering those services, how were you able to sort of back up? Did you have SLAs for your business customers, which I know are obviously very, very important?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Not only did we have an SLA, that was a USP for us, because we would say, we've got a service level agreement. We believe we're the only people other than BT that are empowered to deliver a service level agreement, because we're delivering this connectivity to you in the last mile. So anyone else who's delivering that connectivity to you, they're delivering it over a third party medium. So how can they offer an SLA? They're not in control of that. So that was actually a key selling point, is yes, we can deliver an SLA. yes, we're not BT. We're a small company. We're Mickey Mouse compared to BT, but we've got guys available 24 hours with the keys to every site, with the equipment to every radio we've got deployed, with the login to every router in our entire network. So we are actually empowered end to end to fix a problem, whereas no one else is.
Yeah, and that presumably gave a great deal of confidence to these customers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned about your sort of disappointments and frustrations with customer service, both that you had received and also in organizations that, you know, you worked for. Obviously, that will have played an important role in the organization that you wanted to develop. So how did you help build that kind of culture into MetroNet?
We hired people who, there were some specific skills we needed, i.e., you know, to be able to configure a Cisco router, for example, to understand in-depth IP technology and to be able to code stuff, you know, write script, write systems for us. Those are skills that you have to hire in and then bring on once they're in the business. But the rest of it is we tried to hire people who were not tainted by the industry. So we didn't want to hire someone who had been working at an ISP before, because you almost have to go backwards before you go forwards with someone like that, because they would have a knowledge of how things were done in their business that wouldn't work for us. So we would try and hire people who hadn't been in a service industry before. Maybe they've got experience in all sorts of, you know, I mean, we hired builders, we hired roofers, we hired scaffolders. We hired some graduates, although we tried not to hire, you know, I preferred not to hire graduates, but all in all, though, I wouldn't generally look at a CV. We wouldn't have any interest. I would want to talk to someone across the table and gauge whether or not they were willing. All they needed to do really was be engaged and give 100%, and, you know, be willing to learn, be willing to be part of the team. And if they were able to do that and deliver that, then happy days. That's all they need. Those were the only requirements. Everything else we could provide for them in-house. And then when you're saying to someone, okay, so when a customer calls, you need to answer you always need to answer the phone. Even if you're on another call, you answer the phone and you say, hi, can you just hold for a minute? Or if a customer sends an email and you can't send a response to it, you send them a response to tell them you can't send a response.
Yeah.
Those are alien concepts to almost every person who's worked in an industry like this. But if someone hasn't worked, if you explain to someone that this is how it's done, then it's normal for them if they haven't done it like that before. So that's what we were able to do.
So it's absolutely interesting that you mentioned your strategy for hiring, and in other business guys that I've talked to, they've also mentioned a common theme about this issue of kind of leaving behind the CV, the resume, and actually just having a conversation, because it gives you a little bit more about the person's genuine attitude. And ultimately, skills can be taught, but the attitude kind of has to be in place beforehand. Now, you mentioned in your bio that you didn't have a stellar academic career. I mean, do you think there is value from academics, or what do you sort of see is the role of academics in a business journey?
I don't think it matters one way or the other. There's obviously some businesses and some industries where that lend themselves more readily to academics. But I think the word that you've just used there is the important one, which is attitude. I think I think it stops there. If someone's got the correct attitude, then they're then they're good to go. The fact that they, it turns out my excuse for not doing well at school is it turns out I was only diagnosed a couple of years ago, but I suffer from ADHD quite significantly as it turns out, and that was only diagnosed whilst I was getting both my kids, who are unfortunate enough to have followed in my footsteps from that perspective. And for me, that meant that I find it difficult to focus on stuff that isn't immediately interesting to me. In essence, it tends to mean I have lots of ideas. I'm very creative. I know what I want to do, and I know how to do it. I'm not interested beyond that. I'm not an executor. I can't execute anything. If there's this empty cup of tea that I've just drunk, it will stay in my office for the next week because I just will procrastinate about taking it through to the next room. That's how it is. So I subconsciously knew I needed to surround myself with people who were good executors. That was kind of crucial.
So do you regard yourself mainly as a strategist then? You can see a vision, you know what needs to be done, and then you require executors to actually make it happen. But yes, you're not completely, like in an ivory tower as such. You know what needs to be done. It's just that it makes more sense from an efficiency perspective to get, not have to reinvent the wheel for these things.
Well, yeah, I know what needs to be done, and I know exactly how it needs to be done, and I know how I want that to be done. But I'm not. So if I'm at the moment, I'm refurbing a house. It's a job that suits me really well because I'll start on the bathroom. I'll do some tiling. Halfway through the tiling, I'll lose interest with the tiling, but then I can go and I can start building the sink. Then I'll lose interest with that. Then I can go and fix a couple of floorboards, and eventually I'll come back to the tiling. And that's a perfect job for me because I can start lots of jobs and not finish any of them, and then go back and so it's kind of like that. I know that we need to do this to customers and we need to focus our way like that, and I know how to make that happen, but I just don't have I can't stick with it all the way through. Once someone's making it happen, then that's perfect for me. I'm really interested in it, and I'll say, yeah, okay, tweak that, tweak this, but the monotony of actually doing that all the way from A to B doesn't interest me. I'm just not able to do it.
Yeah, understood. The heavy lifting, it makes sense to use experts in that area. Well, the organization obviously grew, and you had funding. With a lot of the companies in the late 90s, I guess, and early 2000s, there was a huge focus on revenue and growth by whatever measure that might be. And profit took a bit of a backseat. And then obviously profit tends to come back into fashion at some point or another in terms of returning, investor funds and so on. What was the strategy? Was your strategy focused on revenue or profit or a bit of both when you were growing in those early days?
So we went through some very painful times. There was multiple times I racked up a lot of debt paying people's wages because we didn't have any money in the business. But because of that, we were very, very prudent. I would go out with our engineers and pull stuff out of skips to build new enclosures for outside equipment and stuff like that. And we found prudent ways to do things. But as a result of that early experience, I was very keen that we must be able to weather any storms that come our way. So we built up a very significant bank account. We had many millions of reserve in cash. I think when we did our first MBO, the equity house that was buying us couldn't understand why we turned over something like, at that time, I don't know, £6 or £8 million. We had that much in the bank. And they were very keen for us to have that money out working, where I was very keen because we'd had such lean times in the early years. I wanted that backstop in case of a downturn in business, something we needed to invest in, any particular Black Wednesday event, whatever you want to call it. And it made the business more comfortable with that flexibility to be able to pay whatever, to be able to pay our way out of any kind of issue. But that would never have happened if it wasn't for the pain we'd gone through in the early years. It's fair to say that all the way through this journey, there were investors, if you like, be they a private equity company, be they the business angels. So there was always a requirement to report in terms of what the EBITDA looked like, what the revenues were. So yeah, there was never a fashion for us. It was all about how much money we were making, what profit and EBITDA looked like from the early days. That was the yardstick.
And obviously cash flow was an extremely important aspect of this, so that you could keep those sort of rainy day balances, the weathering the storm balances as such.
Well, our capital expenditure was huge. Because we were building a network, so we were building out these rooftop sites. We were putting all our competitors were just leasing services from a third party and selling them at a margin. So our business was quite hard to understand for incoming investors because they were very scared of our capital expenditure. It was huge, but we were essentially building a what turned out to be a valuable asset. But yeah, the capital expenditure was very significant.
So the business grew for a number of years, but it underwent various different, you said, management buyouts. What was the reasoning behind those?
Well, the one thing that no one tells you when you end up setting up and running a business is that once that happens, you're never working for anyone ever again other than yourself. You become unemployable from the day you set your own business up, just because having that gift of being able to see something that's wrong and fix it wherever it is in the business there and then is something you couldn't ever not have if you were working for someone. You just couldn't envisage. Well, certainly I couldn't envisage working for someone unless I had full control to be able to affect full maximum change. So that's a scary thing when you realize that you're 5 years into this business. Yeah, you're drawing a salary from it, but all of a sudden your end game options are way more limited because you're never going to go and work for anyone ever again. So there became a need, from my perspective, to crystallize something from what had happened in the past and where we were now. So I met with an advisor randomly, in fact, and he said, "Well, have you thought about doing a management buyout?" And I said, "Well, how does that work?" And they said, "Well, we basically buy the company. You sell your bit of the company, you get some money for it, and we'll give you a bigger slice of the cake back, and some more cash and some stock in the business." And I thought, well, that sounds all right. So I kind of said, "Well, how much cash?" And they said, "Well, there's this much." And I said, "Well, if you think there was a deal where you could give me X chunk of cash, that'll be enough to pay my mortgage off, and that would get my wife off my back, and I would feel like I'd achieved something. I was moving forward. So yeah, and a month later, the whole process started, and we did our first management buyout. And it all worked. It was a very interesting process, but it meant we needed to grow up very quickly, because all of a sudden we were owned by private equity, and those guys, they opened the private equity new company manual, and you have a 100-day plan. It's the normal thing, and in this 100-day plan is all about becoming maturing as a company. Some of it's logical, like the audits need to be done at the correct time and in the correct way, and in a standardized procedure. The way everything's tracked. Basically, what they're trying to do is make you a tradable asset, so they can sell you and make with all the questions that are likely to be asked in another transaction. They want them all answered on day one. So it is kind of logical, but it's also very disruptive for a business, because all of a sudden, we had a very flat management structure, and they want to start playing with that. They want to start normalizing your business, and I found that a little frustrating. That we've been running a successful business for 6 or 7 years. We know what works, we know what doesn't, and there's always a risk that when a third party starts having a say in how a business is run, that the DNA gets diluted. I think it's always going to get diluted, and it's just a question of how much it does get diluted. Fortunately, with our first management buyout, that didn't really happen. They were an astute business who would come to our board meetings, turn to the back page where the numbers were. If the number was pleasable and pleasing to them, they would shut the board paper and open and play games on their phone for the next hour and a half during the board meeting, and have absolutely no input into anything meaningful. And it was probably a very clever move from them, because they quadrupled their money in 18 months by doing that.
Right. So, obviously you were able to return investors' funds, keep them extremely happy. So with all these happy days, the question has to be asked, why were you looking for an exit at that point? Or did that come about differently?
At this point, I wasn't looking for an exit. By this time, we were about 75, 80 people. For me, an absolute sweet spot in the business. A totally flat management structure. I knew everyone. Everyone knew me. Everyone knew everyone else. And there was no part of the business that was unexplorable for anyone who worked in the business. So everyone knew the whole customer journey, how the mechanics of the business worked. And it also meant that when we got someone new into the business, if they didn't deliver, they were policed by the people around them. It wasn't an environment where you could hide. It was an environment where everyone gave 100%. They all worked very hard. They were rewarded very well for doing it as well. But we were able to give dysfunctional people like myself and lots of other people a place where they could play to their strengths. So, there were lots of people who they weren't any good at social interaction. They never wanted to meet a customer. They weren't good at fighting their corner. But they had a very specific skill that worked well for us. And there was lots of people like that. And I thought that was what was going to be a problem with our private equity partner, is that I didn't think I could muster enough people who could credibly sit around a boardroom table, not because they weren't capable, but because outwardly they wouldn't appear to be credible. As it happens, it wasn't a problem at this time. But we did a second deal 18 months later. We'd grown very quickly. The first deal was valued the company at 12.5 million. The second deal valued the company at 45 million, just 18 months later.
Right.
And things changed quite significantly. The company grew much quicker than I wanted it to grow. So we weren't able to manage the people in as well. The board got very large. We started putting additional layers of management in the company, which meant that for the first time, people didn't have visibility across the whole business. And all of a sudden, ivory towers started to pop up. We grew very quickly to 200 people and beyond. I was having to recruit people with acronyms I'd never even heard of for roles that I didn't really understand why we needed. And I felt that my power over the business was gone. It was difficult to make decisions without having to sit around a table and explain to half a dozen or a dozen people why I'm making those decisions. And it was at that point that I realized. I also must say, I spent 10 years working 7 days a week, living away from home for most of that, never going on holiday. I think I went on holiday 2 or 3 times with my family, and I dreaded every day away from the office. I was more nervous about going on holiday than anything else. I never wanted to be away. It's an all-engulfing, all-encompassing thing, and it does suck the energy away from you. But when there's more upsides than downsides, that's fine. But I could see that the balance was tipping. And, I thought, if I do this for another 10 years, I might not live another 10 years. I mean, the day I made the decision that I needed to start engineering and exit was the day that I can remember we'd had some kind of issue that was reasonably serious with a network outage or something like that. And I remember having to ask someone to dial the numbers for me on my phone because my hands were shaking so much I couldn't physically dial them myself. And I thought, James, you can't keep doing this. So when we did the second deal, I engineered a sort of an exit, a backdoor, really, to say I want to work half the time. And it was a difficult conversation over money. They wanted to pay me more. I wanted them to pay me less. And we both knew we were talking about how much commitment to the business I would have. But ultimately, we got there. But I found it hard to work in a business that I'd founded on a part-time basis. So I ended up spending most of my time still working in the business.
Were you still at this stage, you were running the show, or had you transitioned to a different role?
No, I had transitioned. Part of the deal was I transitioned to strategic director or something like that, something that was parked. And so we spent 6 months hiring another CEO. We hired another CEO. It didn't. The CEO came from within the industry, and the first thing that the CEO wanted to do was to change the DNA of the business, which ultimately that did happen, and it had a detrimental effect on the business. And things kind of just tailed down from there, really. And for me, an incredibly sad time to see the rise and fall of something. So yeah, if I was to do it all again, I would probably give the private equity a miss if there was any other way.
Right. And what in that case, in that vision, you would still be running this business then?
Yeah, well, I would have found the sweet spot, which, as I said, was between 75 and 100 people. I think that's the most people you can have in a business with a relatively flat management structure and have everyone aware of what they're doing. and I would have just turned it into a lifestyle business. Everyone would have earned a chunk of the business, and we would have continued. I wouldn't want to grow it beyond that kind of size, because you just, all of a sudden you can't stop the ivory towers and the corporate side of things taking over at that point.
Yeah. So what did you found essentially that there was a degree of loss of sovereignty over the business once the funding levels got to a particular degree, and that limited your ability to shape the future of the company in the way that you had founded it?
Well, the thing is, the moment you have a private equity company involved, or the minute you're private equity owned, you're on you're essentially on a treadmill. The timer starts. They're generally pension funded, so they have a fun life, and they want to be in and out within a certain period of time. And all they want to do is increase the value of their investment. They want the business to grow. They want the bottom line, the EBITDA number, to be bigger than it was when they came in. There's lots of ways to achieve that. They're not all necessarily fundamental to the longevity of the business. But of course, that's not necessarily so. Your interests aren't necessarily aligned if you're taking investment from private equity, unless your interests are aligned exactly with the private equity ones, which they could be. If you're looking at an exit at the same time as private equity are looking for an exit, then your interests are aligned. But if you're looking for the business to continue trading and to travel in a particular direction that you have a vision for, then the moment you get third-party investment in is the minute that there's going to be a deviation of interests and of visions that there's nothing you can do about. You can't stop that, because one's looking to go one way, one's potentially looking to go the other way.
Got it. Yeah. No, it's very, very interesting. So obviously you found yourself in the position, or rather you kind of created the conditions whereby you would be able to exit, and that happened in 2020. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what actually happens under those circumstances? Do you get a large deposit of cash into your bank account and you say goodbye, or
that's it? Pretty much. That's pretty much, you've nailed it. That's pretty much what happens. My exit was part of a third and final transaction when the company was sold yet again. You basically, on the waterfall document, your name has 100% out, nothing carried over, no loan notes, no shares, no stock carried over. It all comes out on the day of the transaction and comes directly to you. It's as simple as that, really. That's it.
So, having had such a whirlwind of a time from kind of the early 2000s, and then finding yourself, still a relatively young man with, a decent little pot of cash, what does a guy like that do who's been used to running an enterprise?
I get asked this a lot. The one thing at the moment, the one thing I would say is I'm shocked that I ever had time to work, because I'm busy all the time. But then again, I'm the kind of guy that I'm as happy spending half a day fixing a vacuum cleaner in my garage, if it means if I can fix it and I don't have to go and buy a new one. I enjoy it. I find it a challenge. That kind of thing's fulfilling for me. So I don't miss any of it. other than the people. I miss the people. It's, for me, one of the most satisfying things is being able to create an environment where lots of people, that there's people in there who are flourishing, who most likely would not be if they were not in that environment. And that's a very satisfying thing to be able to. It's also one of the hardest parts, because when you've got 100 people in a business, every decision, when the business was young, I could make a decision. I could go and tell a supplier or a customer or a competitor or anyone, I could go and tell them to do one if I wanted, and forget what impact it might have on our business. But once you've got 100 people, then you've got to think through everything very carefully, because everything you do potentially has an impact on 100 people, 100 families, and the wider impact within those families. So that's quite a weight to carry on your shoulders, that you're responsible for that many people. But it's also a lovely thing to be able to see them grow, and when they go out and buy their first house, and you're thinking, yeah, I've helped you do that, and that's a really nice feeling. So I'll miss that for sure, and I'll miss the ability to. We haven't talked about it much in this, but I know when we met recently, we discussed it in quite some detail, that the whole customer service thing is what I know made this business very successful. And it's not rocket science. It's not written about in any how to run a business manual. It's an alien concept to almost every other business. And because of that, there's so much low-hanging fruit. It's the opportunity to deliver a decent level of service to customers. It's, especially in this country, applies to almost every industry, every corner of the country. There's not a business that I have enough confidence to be. I could walk into a business, and I could deliver within a relatively short space of time a significant, and by significant, I'm talking about very significant change to the way they engage with customers, the amount of business they get with customers, and their future opportunity, to almost any business in the UK. And in the back of somewhere down there, that I have a feeling I will be forced to go and do that again. And I've got a number of ideas, but like I said, I'm not an executor. That's the problem. So I'm not going to go out and set another business up. All the stars will have to align. Someone will have to say, James, why don't you come and help me look at this? Because I don't. That's the bit that holds me back. I think, yeah, God, that could be done so much better. Here's how you, and then, but I'd have to do it, So it will happen, but things will have to be exactly right. So I miss that, and I miss the people. Those are the only two things that I miss.
That's incredible. And I think, when it comes to sort of the psychology of entrepreneurship, you mentioned that you've kind of been through a lot of ups and downs. And for aspiring entrepreneurs, what would be your advice to the kind of personal traits that they need to embody in order to get involved in this kind of thing?
I would say that you absolutely need to understand your own limitations. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be good at everything. So it's really crucial that you know what you are good at and play to that. And where possible, you get people to help you, assist you, guide you in the areas that you're not good at. I think that's an absolutely crucial thing. in terms of what else, well, I'm not sure that everyone wants to hear this, but I think it's also fair to say that luck does play its part. And by luck, I mean timing, being in the right place at the right time, the opportunity being timely in terms of where the market is. All those aspects do play a part in something being successful. I'm not saying they're the be all and end all, but I not only did I feel like giving up on numerous occasions, I did give up on numerous occasions. I walked away and got another job. But and I came back, and I found it. I spent. I don't know if this is advice that will work for everyone, but certainly my ethos was to always plan for the worst and hope for the best. So my view was always a negative one. I would always say, how can we mess this up? How can that go wrong? How can this fail? How can that fail? And hoping it didn't. Most of the time it didn't. But I think if you plan for the worst, if you see things from a negative perspective, then it helps you fill in the gaps. If you're starting out, you're thinking, well, okay, how can I run out of money? How will I run out of money? How quick can I run out of money? What's likely to cause me a problem? Did I plan for being reassessed for business rates? Did I plan for premises? Did I plan for having to hire someone? Whatever it is, if you look at how things can go wrong, it often gives you a good guide as how to make them right.
Very, very sage advice indeed. Well, do you do things like, are you involved in the business networking communities and mentorship and coaching and that kind of stuff? Or
not directly, but I am indirectly. There's 2 or 3 businesses that are known to me that I kind of work with. I help out. But no, I'm not in an official capacity.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it would take an alignment of the stars to get you back into the saddle, but you do anticipate that alignment happening at some time.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it will. And probably sooner rather than later, actually. And by an alignment of stars, it's really more about me having a relationship with a certain number of individuals who are the executing side.
Yeah.
And that's almost in place now. So, I've now got the second half of me back, if you see what I mean, which means I can say, right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go out and do this. And it will work. So yeah, I think that is going to happen. So I'll keep you updated on that.
It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I'm 100% sure that people will have got a lot of value from this story. So thanks very much, James McCall.
You're welcome.